Welcome back to the Discount Property Investor Podcast. Our mission is to share what we have learned from our experience and the experiences of others to help you make more money investing like a pro. To jumpstart your real estate investing business, we invite you to Real Estate School. Real Estate School is the coolest place on the planet to learn how to get started investing in real estate. It's really cool to be a part of Real Estate School. To learn more, go to www.reiskool.com. Thanks for tuning in. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Discount Property Investor Podcast. I am your host, David Dodge. Today, I have an awesome guest. His name is Chris Arnold. And Chris is a special guy. He's a unique individual. He's a loving, caring, amazing human. I have known this guy at this point for probably close to 7 or 8 years, give or take. And he has done some amazing things in those 7 or 8 years. He has been responsible for helping me personally with a ton of different transformations in my own life and in my own business, in my relationships. To say that this guy is wise is an understatement. I'm really happy to have him on the show today. We're going to dive in deeply into a couple different topics today, but I wanted to start with that. Chris, welcome to the show, brother.
I appreciate doing this.
You're here.
Yeah, feels good to be here.
Happy you're here, man. So let's just give a little context before we jump in. Chris, you used to be a full-time real estate investor.
Yeah, I did real estate for 19 years. So my journey started on the brokerage side as a real estate broker. Kind of followed the old KW millionaire real estate agent model. I probably did that in totality for probably 11 years. During that time, I got into investing as well. So single family. So everything from fix and flip to wholesaling. So this was all out of Dallas, Fort Worth. Got into the education. I think a lot of people began to kind of follow these routes. So you gain so much experience, right, over time, and you realize that you have a lot to offer in the sense of education. So got into education, bought an education company, sold an education company. And then on top of that, the thing I'd always been passionate about in doing all of this was I run pretty much a brotherhood for high achieving entrepreneurs. And so real estate to me has always been a vehicle, right? So I got in because I wanted freedom of time, freedom of location, freedom of resources to be able to really allocate my time to what I thought and felt was most valuable. So for me, real estate has always been a vehicle.
Man, I love that because a lot of people, I want to unpack a couple things there for a second. A lot of people choose real estate for wealth. They choose real estate for financial freedom. But what they really ultimately want is time freedom. I know that's what I ultimately want. Now, can you have time freedom without financial freedom? Arguably, it's very difficult, right? To be able to just do what you want when you want, whenever you're constantly worried about the bills and whatnot. But I love that you said that and you bring that to attention because real estate can be that vehicle. But it's unfortunate because for a lot of people, it takes a long time to get there, or in some cases, and oftentimes people don't have to actually achieve that time freedom. So I'm happy you brought that up. Real estate's great. I love it. So you did it for 19 years. How long has it been since you have been actively doing real estate at this point?
Since I've gotten out of it for the most part?
Yeah.
About 2 years.
2 years, dude?
2 years. Yeah. So
2 years.
We'll talk about it, but basically went into a forced sabbatical to reevaluate my life, to reevaluate my priorities. I want to go back on what you touched on was like the driving force for most people in real estate is freedom. Now you can define what type of freedom that is, but that is the primary word that you're going to hear come up. The interesting thing is I found for myself, and I see this amongst a lot of my peers, is rather than getting freedom, we build a prison of our own design that we can't escape. And this becomes the irony of it all. So much so that we have less freedom than we did when we worked the 9 to 5 and got out of the rat race in the first place. And so part of my journey is, why does that happen? Why all of a sudden do we find ourselves with less freedom? And honestly, in a lot of ways, walking around on the outside, smiling and broken on the inside. And
amen.
why?
Amen to that, dude. Amen to that.
You know, the underlying thing is we're all high achievers. Most people listening to this podcast that had the ability to step out and become an entrepreneur, for most of us, we're high achievers by nature. And there's good in that, and there's challenges within that. And I think for me, a lot of my journey was to try to understand what was driving me to push so hard, to get up every day. And every time I had additional bandwidth in my life that opened up, I added more on. Whenever I could, I put one more thing on the plate, constantly layering one thing on top of another until, as we'll talk in my story, I completely burnt out and subsequently lost it all. So my journey has been, why was that part of my story? And why do I see this play out in a lot of other entrepreneurial lives, particularly male entrepreneurs as men?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find myself often thinking that busy is good. And, when I look at my schedule, sometimes I want to yell, I want to scream. It can be quite overwhelming. And whenever I do have free time, I sometimes feel that I should say I have in the past. I'm obviously working to become better at this and, find time for me and be mindful of that time. But I'm just saying me here as an example, because I feel that I can speak for a lot of these other entrepreneurs because I'm very similar to them. You obviously were in those shoes at one point as well. But a lot of entrepreneurs think that busy is good and that the harder they work, the more they're going to get ahead. And it's not always the case. It's not always the case. I don't know if you're familiar with Alex Hormozy. I really like Alex. I've been following him for a couple years at this point now. And one of the things I like the most about that guy is he refuses to put things on his calendar unless it's like, one day a week, which is the day that he'll allow that. But it's wide open so he can use his creativity and not feel like he's imprisoned. I think one of the words you had used was, imprisoned in just stuff and tasks and to-dos and obligations and responsibilities and whatnot. So trying to become more mindfulness of that. So I'm excited you're here because I really want to dive more into that. So where do we go from here?
What comes up for me is, I would say, let's look at the scope at a high level of what I've learned was going on in my life and could be potentially going on in the lives of people that are listening right now.
Yep.
And I'm going to speak particularly to male entrepreneurs today, but this applies to a lot of people in the world for the most part. So we have these behaviors in our lives, and there's certain behaviors that we're not really happy about. These behaviors in our life could be being a workaholic. It could be addictions. And that addiction could be anything from, I know when we think addiction, we think drugs and alcohol, but that can be binging out and watching Netflix. That can be overeating. That can play out into, experiences and needing to spend a lot of money to feel a certain way. But we all have these behaviors that are coming out in our lives. And particularly as we get older, they come out more and more. And we feel a lot of shame and we feel a lot of guilt about these behaviors because they start to become destructive in our lives. And I like Dr. Gabor Mate's the definition of addiction, generally speaking, and that is anything that we do in the short term to provide relief, but in the long term, it has consequences, and we continue to do these things despite the consequences. So the question that I've learned to ask when we have these behaviors in our lives, and particularly we see them in other people, is not why the behavior, but why the pain. I'm going to say that again. Not why the behavior, but why the pain. We live in a culture that's very judgmental toward people's behavior, particularly if it's destructive. Because we ask questions like, well, why don't they just stop? Like, I don't get it. Why do they continue to keep this behavior going when it's apparent to themselves and everyone around them that it's creating destruction? And again, these behaviors can be as simple as being a workaholic and letting your family go to the wayside and watch those, relationships that you care about so much begin to deteriorate. Like, why do we do this, even though we're aware of it? So the first thing I want people to understand and what I learned about myself was, why would I judge someone for doing something that is trying to provide pain relief in their life? There's nothing wrong wanting relief from pain. It's a very normal thing, but our culture doesn't look at it that way because we judge the behavior, but we don't ask why the pain. So let's go one level deeper underneath that of what I began to understand. Underneath this behavior is trauma. And I know people don't kind of really like that word. I'll use another word as well, call it childhood wounds, etc. But basically, this trauma is coming from 1 to 2 places in our life. It's either around 0 to 10 in our early developmental process, when something or things happen to us within the family structure that basically fuck us up. And what happens to us is traumatic. But what happens inside us when something happens to us is trauma. And that's a key distinction. So when you're 0 to 10 and something traumatic happens to you, you're not old enough or conscious enough in the sense of having an adult mentality to deal with it. So if you're abused by your father, if your mom was an alcoholic, if your parents divorced, any of those type of things, you have to understand as a child, you don't know how to deal with that shit. It's a very, very difficult thing to navigate. And what epigenetics shows, which is basically the science of how trauma travels, we also know that you can be dealing with behaviors, sensations, and feelings in your body that don't even belong to you. You inherited them through genes. This is unbelievable. It's incredible to understand this. So if there's undealt with trauma going generations back in your family, it can manifest in your life. I'll give a very personal example of that. My grandfather committed suicide at the age of 45 by driving his car off a bridge. My mom committed suicide at the age of 50 by running her car into a pole. I had a suicide attempt at the age of 43 by taking a bunch of pharmaceutical medicines that I was having an adverse effect to. And David, you were there. We'll get into this at a certain point. But I swallowed a couple boxes of Xanax and got into a pool to kill myself in Honduras. David, you were there when they fished me out of a pool at 2:00 in the morning. So I didn't understand these things. Why, for me, never having suicidal ideations in my life? Why, for me, not having any pre-mental health conditions around that same age would have that same behavior? And because there was an underlying current of epigenetic trauma running through my family that not dealt with. And it arose in my life at a point in which I was in one of the most difficult and darkest places of my life. It manifested. So when you look at that, it becomes very, very eye-opening in understanding what's driving us. Now, here's the key. Underneath that trauma is a core sentence, and it's a core belief that is driving us. And our trauma is some version of this sentence that's driving us. And the core belief or sentence is, I'm not enough. I'm not enough. So when you're a child and for some reason your mom's not able to give you attention for whatever reason that it is, maybe she has personal struggles in her life. Maybe her and your father did not get along. In my case, my mom was an alcoholic. So when my mom's an alcoholic and she is self-absorbed in her own life, which she should be because she's dealing with her stuff, that means that she's not there for me. Now, as a child between 0 and 10, I can't come to the conclusion because I'm too small to understand and look at my mom as an adult that basically her behavior was because she was touched by tragedy. Again, I don't ask why the behavior, but why the pain. It was pain driven. But at 0 to 10, I don't comprehend that. So guess what I begin to comprehend? And the only thing I can do, Blame myself. The reason she's not giving me this attention is because I'm not enough. I'm not enough. And this gets buried deep, deep into our souls. And my version of that, more specifically, if you were to ask me, my specific version that drove my life was I'm inadequate. I'm inadequate. And this would play out at different times in my life. But basically, my life was this sense of repeating this trauma, this sentence in my life. And here's the way it would play out in, let's say, business. If I'm functioning from a low vibrational energy of fear, trauma, shame, I will get to my goal, but it will cost me a lot, because when you're driving from those levels, you're not really thinking properly, and you're willing to do whatever it takes to stop feeling inadequate. But the irony of it is once you get there and you have it, well, then you don't feel adequate of having it. So then you self-sabotage and you go back down. And what you begin to see in the lives of male entrepreneurs, and I see this as this roller coaster of success to failure to success to failure, and it continues. And so for me, what I had to begin to understand underneath all, what drove me to be a high achiever, why I would work as hard as I did and take on as much responsibility as I did throughout my life. And again, to think it was normal, because all my friends do the same thing, working a lot of hours per week, doing everything we can. It's just, I thought it was normal, but it's basically now like being a fish in water. I see the water, and underneath that, and what's driving all that, is this core belief that I'm not enough. And it's affecting our lives tremendously. And so if I could do one thing today, it's to at least move that from an unconscious state to a conscious state, because the reality is most of the decisions we're making in our life is coming from an unconscious level. We know this. And what I'm going to tell you is what's driving those unconscious decisions for most of us is going to stem from that core sentence of I'm not enough.
Agreed. I love the fact that you had mentioned, the ups and downs and the roller coaster. And me and you have had conversations about this, lots of them in the past, but one in particular comes to mind about how, when you hear of somebody spiraling, you kind of think of a negative connotation there, like they're spiraling out of control. But there's a flip side to that. You can spiral up too. You can spiral down, you can spiral up. And but business is a roller coaster. And I think a lot of people, probably I'd be, comfortable even saying the majority of people, can relate to what you're saying in terms of feeling inadequate and working themselves to death and chasing success. And, that's what we often think is needed. And it's not. Beyond that, it's hard to sometimes step out of the box or out of the fish tank in terms of your analogy and look at the water and look at the tank. So I'd love to, keep breaking this down here today. This is good. Your experiences, I think, are going to be great to keep breaking this down. So yeah, where do we go from here, Chris?
Yeah. So this whole process that creates us to be high achievers puts us in an interesting game or mindset. And basically it creates what is called a performance-based self-esteem. So because I don't feel like enough, because I feel like I'm inadequate, I need to wake up every day and prove myself every day. Call
Every
it the
day.
chip on the shoulder, whatever it is. Who am I proving myself to? Myself. For a lot of people, it's their parents, particularly for us as men, as our fathers. We just want to feel that sense of like he's proud of us, right? Because we don't feel like we're enough for some reason. There's a craving to need to hear that from him because of our own trauma. And this continues to create a performance-based self-esteem. So, I mean, we see this all the time. And I could talk to your families and they would point this out because they're the ones they're most aware of it. When the bank account goes up and business is good, our self-esteem is good. And when it drops, we drop. And so
They're not connected though.
What's that?
They're not connected though.
They shouldn't be.
Well, let me rephrase. We connect them, but they're not connected though. Those are separate things.
Great. I
Love
fully
that.
agree with that. The challenge is, and what I realize is either A, we don't know this, B, we know it, but here's the real problem. C, we don't feel it.
Yeah.
These are concepts and fundamental concepts, I think, for generally, like we understand, hey, don't tie your identity into your business, right? I think we've all heard that. But as they say, the longest journey a man's going to have to take is from his head to his heart. And it's one thing to know something, and it's another to wake up and feel it every day. So if I were to pose this question of how many of you listening right now wake up every day and feel like you don't have something to prove, I would say that most people listening can't say that they feel that way. It's why they're getting up and they're driving every day. So this performance-based esteem then comes from this place again of I'm not enough, because here's the reality. If you woke up every day and felt that you were enough, then you wouldn't have something to prove. It wouldn't be needed. And the reason is it's so difficult to answer questions like how much money is enough? How much revenue is enough? How many doors in your investment portfolio is enough? The reason it's so challenging to answer that question is because if you're coming from a place of I'm not enough, you can't answer the question because no amount is enough to make you feel enough. And this creates this vicious game that we wake up to and we play every day. And the people that are paying for it the most are our wives and our kids. And the reality is the painful day comes when that relational bill is due. When the kids start getting older, they start communicating and they're acting out because this becomes their trauma, because we're just reciprocating what happened to the generation above us, to the generation below us. And it becomes a very significant relational bill due when we're workaholics by nature. And at the end of the day, the challenge is we somehow believe that this behavior of overachieving is that we're doing it for them. We lie to ourselves. Bullshit. Why do you work so hard? I do it for my kids. It's bullshit.
It's bullshit.
Self-deception.
It's easy to say that. Let me just throw a comment in here. It's easy to say that, and it's even easy to think it. And some people probably believe it, but those kids don't give a shit about the money. They care about the time. And so I'm agreeing with you 1,000%, Chris. 1,000%.
The way I've heard it said is kids don't want your presence. They want your presence. Another way I heard it say, which really hit me hard, particularly for us or those listening that are raising boys, is you're out there taking risks and making all these moves and getting pats on the back because of what you've accomplished. But I'll tell you, at the end of the day, boys don't want their father's balls. They want their father's heart.
Yep.
They have a misunderstanding, and we all do, of what masculinity is about. We live in a very, what I would consider misinformed, particularly American culture, about masculinity. The masculinity is about not crying. Masculinity is about not feeling those feelings. That's just an obstacle in the pursuit of my high achievement to get to the goal that I need to get to. And so what that creates is we become emotionless. And how in the world is a 10-year-old girl going to have a relationship with a father who's emotionless? How is a wife going to feel secure and feel safe and feel willing to be vulnerable if her husband just looks at her without emotion at all? You can't connect. But again, this isn't, going back to a place of judgment at all. I understand why we are this way. Again, don't ask the question, why the behavior, but why the pain? The reality is most of us have some undealt shit with, and we've shut down emotionally. We don't want to feel, it's understandable not to want to feel these things because we have shame and we have regret about things that have happened. And unbeknownst to us, that little boy that's living inside of us is taking all the blame for what the parents did. Now, whether you consciously understand this or not, emotionally, you're stuck in time. He's stuck in time. he is still functioning from a place of being young and being hurt. And that's how it's manifesting in the world. And a lot of ways that this will manifest is through depression.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think, don't really understand depression, particularly from a cultural standpoint. We think depression is like, I don't want to get out of bed. And, it's like a feminine, wimpy, like, I'm not gonna use the word disease, but we'll say prognosis, right? No, I'm not depressed. But here's the interesting thing about depression for men is women internalize pain and men externalize it. And one of the primary ways in which you see depression come out in men is through anger and through rage and through grandiosity. Those are manifestations of depression in our lives that doesn't look and sound like depression, but we externalize it. So if you're going around wondering like why you're so angry at the world, why you yell and snap at your kids and your wife,
Yeah, why you beating your chest, man? It's like
beating your chest. Again, it's coming from a place of sadness because again, as we talked about, there's these behaviors. Underneath these behaviors is this depression, and underneath of what's making you sad is this undealt with trauma in your life.
100%, man. This conversation also reminds me a lot of The Gap in the Gain. It's actually probably at this point my favorite book of all the books I've ever read, which is a lot of books. Entrepreneurs specifically are always moving the goalpost, and we're never measuring backwards. You had said earlier, enough. What's enough? And it's such I love that word. It's so profound to me because if you asked me what enough was 5 years ago, it'd be different than if you had asked me what it was 5 months ago. And would also be different if you had asked me what that was 15 years ago, right? Like we're constantly moving the goalpost. So I don't know how that necessarily ties in, but I really like that book. It's resonated a lot with me. I think it is important for this particular conversation. We are always trying to chase more and better and bigger. And I don't really know why. Maybe we just want to prove to ourselves or other people. But that book ultimately has helped me a lot because it's like, hey, measure backwards. Quit moving the goalpost. And when you start doing that, at a minimum, it'll bring some happiness into your life because you're like, holy shit, I'm at where I wanted to be 5 years ago. I may not be where I want to be right now, but looking back where I wanted to be 5 years ago, like I'm like past that at this point. So for those of you listening, great book, highly recommend it. Didn't mean to get off on a tangent there. But as entrepreneurs, let's bring it back. As entrepreneurs, we're moving the goalposts. So I'm kind of, circling back to what you had said with enough. And I can relate personally 100% to that.
Yeah. So one thing I'll say is one of the objections that comes up for us is, well, is this going to make me a non-performer? Is doing this type of work, connecting myself, getting well, is that basically going to make me a pussy? That's what people think, right?
Yep.
If you remove that drive that's making me do this, it's coming from a place of I'm not enough and inadequacy, then what's going to drive me? And what I'm going to tell you is what you'll move to is rather than functioning from a low vibrational frequency of fear and shame and guilt and inadequacy, you're going to function from a higher vibrational frequency of love and peace and joy. And I am telling you, those things will drive you in a way that the things before couldn't drive you because you're functioning basically out in an entirely new operational system.
100%. Are you familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza?
I am.
Love that guy.
Yeah.
Love that guy. So to build on this, he says that we get into these loops of thinking and feeling and thinking and feeling, which ultimately flips itself to feeling and thinking and feeling and thinking. And if we are thinking negative, scarce, fear, we're going to feel those things. And on the flip side, if we wake up and we feel those things because we were thinking about them yesterday, we're going to start thinking about those things. I love Joe Dispenza. He has multiple books on this topic. He's got a really great show on the Gaia channel called Rewired. Anyone that's wanting to dive deeper into this, check that guy out. Didn't mean to interrupt you, Chris, but I 100% relate to what you're saying.
So then people are listening, and this becomes what this comes down to is you're going to have to deal with this at some point. We all do, but it's either going to be by choice or it's going to be by catastrophe. And in my case, it was by massive catastrophe. It's basically like holding a beach ball under the water. You can hold it down for so long, but eventually that thing's going to blow out of the water and shit's going to go everywhere. And that's what happened in my life. And so part of me telling a bit about the story that I'm about to share with you of my catastrophe is in hope that people can get there more by choice. You don't have to go through what I went through, and mine's a very radical stripping. So the way I got there was through intense suffering. So basically I went through a 7-month expedited dark night of the soul. Don't recommend it, but it was effective. For sure. So I am in Honduras. David Dodge is there. Preceding the months before that, I had gone through a divorce with a wife I had been married to for 10 years. I had been living in dishonesty because I cheated on her and I didn't tell anyone about it because, again, there's an underlying fear driving my life. If people know this about me, then they won't accept me. I mean, it's one of the biggest fears we have. If you really knew what's going on in my life, you would reject me, which was just playing greater into my sense of inadequacy. I'm not enough. Of course, I was in fear to share that. I wasn't living in a place of wholeness and wellness that I could talk about my shit from a place of authenticity because people's approval was so much tied into my identity. I'm the kind of person that if one person didn't like me, I would pine away over it, to go out of my way to get that person to like me. Because if you like me, then that shows that I have value and that I'm enough. So now I'm leaning on other people's approval to get a sense of adequacy. So I'm in Honduras. I've gone through this divorce. I had bought an educational company, and because I wasn't in the headspace to run it through the dishonesty, the divorce, and 19 years of running businesses and just sacrificing myself and my energy and my well-being for the sake of achieving, there was nothing left in the tank. And now I've got to sell this company and it's going to be public. And because it's public, I have so much shame and guilt, and I'm losing my team that I had spent 10 to 12 years building. They're on the phone crying that our family's being broken up, that they're single moms. How am I going to, take care of my kids? Like, I am carrying all as the leader. It's on me. I'm the point guy. And the amount of shame and guilt I had was at a level I never did before. And now I got to navigate the most difficult business challenge of my life. And I got nothing in the tank. So when I'm in Honduras, I start having anxiety attacks for the first time in my life. And basically, I can't sit still. Like, my body is shaking. My ability to be decisive goes out. Like, I can't make decisions. Like, it's manifesting in a way that for David and some of the other guys that were there, it was deeply concerning. And mind you, we are in Honduras for the Brotherhood that I was running to basically do a philanthropic build project that we raise money for. And the week of the sale of this company coincides with the exact week that I've got to be in Honduras. I mean, it's just and I remember thinking to myself, there's no way I can be in Honduras and try to be out on a job site and deal with the sale of this company in the last week with attorneys doing what attorneys do. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to exit out of a company. And so in that, what we felt like needed to be done was to get some anti-anxiety medicine, which is what you do in America. So we got some Xanax, some over-the-counter Xanax. And this is in Honduras, so who knows what was in it? But basically, that was the decision that was made in order to help. And when I took it, unfortunately, I had an adverse effect to it. And within about 2 days, I went into onset depression. And again, mind you, I know there's a lot of people taking medications out there. I'm just telling you my story and my response to it. You will have to process these things for yourself. But basically, I had an adverse effect. And about the 4th or 5th day, when I'm up on the roof working, I go into what are called benzos hallucinations. I don't know that this is a hallucination off benzos because I know nothing about benzodiazepines. And to define benzodiazepines, we'll say benzos for the sake of this conversation. That is the family that includes Xanax, Valium, Klonopin, and Ativan. So I'm up on the roof and I start thinking I have a vision from God. And in this vision, I'm not hearing things from an auditory standpoint or seeing things, but I become the observer and there's a guided voice inside of me. And I hear 3 things. Number 1, Chris, there's absolutely no way out of this situation that you're going into. And this is what benzos do. They exacerbate everything. I knew a way out. It was going to be shitty. I was losing a lot of money, but I had a plan. But in the benzos, there was no way out. Chris, your life is over. Done. Game over. And I believe this and I internalize this. The second thing is my life started playing out. And basically I started seeing different points in my life. And what I heard was, Chris, you're an absolute fraud. Everything you've ever done in your life has been out of ill will and you're a piece of shit. And I'm absorbing all this. And at first I'm thinking this is from God. Like God is like showing me my sin because it's going into my theological bucket because I have a theological background. I went to seminary. I have a master's degree in theology. So it's going into that bucket. And then the last thing I hear, and it's the first time in my life that I ever experienced this, was, Chris, when you go back to the room tonight, it was like marching orders. You're going to take all that Xanax, the 2 boxes, put it in your mouth and get into a pool and kill yourself. It was like marching orders. It was clear as day. I worked the rest of the day on the roof knowing that was what I was going to do when I went home that night to the hotel. And so I did. And I blacked out once I did it. And I woke up the next day in a Honduras hospital. And fortunately, my friends like David, who were down there, I say fortunately and unfortunately for them, had to fish me out of a pool at 2:00 in the morning. And now I woke up and I'm in a Honduras hospital. And I don't know why the fuck I just did what I tried to do. But all I know is I just tried to take my life on a multipliers trip with my brotherhood while building a church in Honduras. I can't fathom why I did what I did. And it will be months before I understand that Xanax and benzos create massive suicidal ideations. People are killing themselves left and right, depending on the response that they have to it. But I don't know this, so I'm carrying all of this. All I know is I made the decision I needed to make. And so I went back to Dallas. And at this point, everyone is trying to help. Got a great community of people that showed up. But the challenge is none of us know what to do because when I'm in Dallas, I wake up and my body is convulsing and I can't formulate sentences. So basically it's like I'm like disabled mentally. And at this point, we don't know how long I was underwater for. Did I have like brain damage? Was this an effect of benzos? I mean, we don't know anything about benzodiazepines at this point. So because of that, my family goes, we need to send you somewhere. You need to go to doctors because this is above us. And so I went to a place, which is one of these high-end, like luxury rehabilitation centers. They're a catch-all for everything, codependency, PTSD, drugs, alcohol, you name it. One of these places you've probably seen like on TV that advertise. And that's what we thought was best to do. And I'm not going to speak on behalf of all of these places. I'm just going to speak on my experience. When I got there and I woke up in the bed and I was shaking and not able to formulate sentences, they asked me what was wrong. And I said, I don't know what's wrong. It's why I'm here. You tell me. And they sent me in to see a psychiatrist. And within the end of one meeting, I walked out basically on 5 prescription drugs: lithium, Prozac, baclofen, antipsychotics, the works. Never taken prescription drugs in my life. I communicated that. But again, I'm just going to do what I've always been taught to do. Trust the doctors, take the medication. And I'm not saying that's always the wrong thing to do or the right thing to do. I'm just saying be very cautious not to give authority complete authority over to someone because they have a title in front of their name or they're wearing a white coat.
Well said.
On this.
Well said.
On this. And so basically what happens is, unfortunately, they don't continue me on the very one thing I need, which is I need to be on a benzos, because now I'm going to start going into benzos withdrawal. And to put this in perspective, benzos withdrawal are worse than heroin withdrawals. Worse than heroin withdrawals. And so for the 7 days that I'm in this facility, I'm getting worse. I can't function. I can't go to group. And I just think I'm being the biggest wimp in the world, you know? And basically, unfortunately, they diagnosed my side effects of benzos, which were psychosis, depression, and anxiety, as coming from me, not as the side effects of the benzos. So now I have doctors telling me and my family that I have these things, and I don't know anything about these things, but I'm scared to death. When that doctor looked in my eyes and said, Chris, you are profoundly depressed. What do I do? Never dealt with this before. My family doesn't know what to do with this. So after about a week in the facility, because they felt I wasn't trying enough, and let me put this into perspective. When you go into benzos withdrawal, it takes over the firing of your neurotransmitters. So you can't function when you try to get off because your neurotransmitters are not firing. You can't, that's the word, you can't function. And after a week, my inability to not function was perceived as an inability to not try. And rather than getting to go home after a week back to my family, they two-man escorted me to a higher level facility. Let me put this into perspective. 6 weeks before, I was in Portugal, traveling and having a great time. Now I'm going to a facility in which people are going to be walking up and down the halls, cutting themselves and screaming. I've never experienced anything like this in my life. And I'm in a state of benzos withdrawal. I don't know these people. And though hell within the hell is for 7 months, I will never understand that what I am in is a state of benzos withdrawal. I will believe after months and months that I am permanently disabled, that I am like this for the rest of my life. That was the hell within the hell that I felt, that experience. And going to the facility, I went into a 2-week blown hallucination because I now am in the acute state of benzos withdrawal. And for 2 weeks, I believed that the FBI was after me, that all the patients were undercover, basically some 21 Jump Street shit, like FBI. It was so exacerbated that I believe they were videoing everything I was doing, recording it, and there was news crews outside, and this was being broadcasted to the world, and David was calling friends saying, turn on CNN, Chris is on, and part of a sting operation. This is how insane this got. This is all an effect of the benzos. So now I'm in a facility with people cornering me in a room trying to force feed me medication. And fortunately, through that process, I was able to get out of it because a doctor, a therapist, stopped being a doctor for a moment. And she started crying like a mom would. And she looked me in the eyes and she wrapped her arms around me and she whispered in my ear, Chris, we're not after you. We're here to help you. And the love and sincerity that I felt in her gave me like the key to unravel that this was not real. And over 2 days I did. It's like watching The Sixth Sense. You get to the end and you realize that Bruce Willis was dead and they replay the movie and you understand you misinterpreted everything. That's basically what happened for 2 weeks, the best way I can describe my experience. So at this point, I just want to get the hell out of this place. And they put me on another benzos called Ativan. And that is the strongest form of benzos you can take. And so before I left, they needed to get me off the Ativan before they sent me home. Now they sent me home on all the other prescription drugs, but they didn't Ativan. So by the time I go home, now I'm not withdrawing off Xanax, I'm withdrawing off Ativan. And I'm on the floor in my parents' house in the fetal position screaming and crying because it feels like my brain is bleeding. Like basically I was close to going into seizures, which could have killed me. None of this is communicated to my family. They don't know what's wrong. I don't know what's wrong. We are all freaking out. And so the only thing is, Chris, go to another home. And I'm like, there's no way you're going to drag me into another home. I just spent weeks on psych watch with someone walking around, writing everything I do around every 15 minutes.
Remember this?
Yeah. Yeah. You've got the click of the pen. Because at night, certain nights, in order for their fear that I was going to kill myself, they would put strangers in the room. And every 15 minutes, I'd hear a click of a pen. And they'd write down what I'm doing and off. That's like putting jet fuel on paranoia because I'm already paranoid because I'm on benzos withdrawal. So this is about the worst environment I think someone could potentially find themselves in a benzos withdrawal. very difficult to navigate that.
One more thing I want you to mention, if you don't mind, is and I don't know at what stage there might have been a lot of them actually, but I remember because I went through trying to think of the best way to word this. I was with you periodically, not necessarily physically, but via phone calls and Zoom calls and FaceTimes through it in and out of this, right? And a lot more so after, of course, reflecting. But you had mentioned to me that there was a time, I don't know if it was in one of these facilities or post, in several actually, where you would like take a pill and then feel great for like 6 hours because you weren't coming down off of it at that point, right? And it was like a light went on. And then I guess it would fade and then not so good anymore. Can you reflect on that at all for me?
Yeah. That will happen kind of when I get out of the facility,
Yep.
which I'll get to, I'll say very shortly, because you're right.
Yep.
I answered that question. It's coming right up. So basically, because I wouldn't go into another facility, because all my family knows to do and my friends is to recommend another facility. You couldn't put me in another facility after all that. No way. I worked and lied and manipulated to get the hell out of that place. So my family needs me to make a decision. What are you going to do? If you're not going to go to a facility, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go back home to Tulum, Mexico, where I live. That was very difficult because at that point, people were fearful that I was going to go home and I was going to kill myself. And basically I was, but I believed this entire time, this is all being interpreted that I had a mental breakdown. So I don't know anything about mental breakdowns, but I'm thinking if I can get back to Tulum, get on my bike, go to the gym, go to the beach, walk on it, like, man, I'll snap back into place because nothing else is working. Nothing else is working.
Why didn't they want you to go back?
Number one, because they feared that I was going to kill myself.
Why else?
Number two, their perspective of Tulum was basically, it was an unhealthy environment.
So last question, why was it an unhealthy environment? And was there any isolation there?
In Tulum for me?
Yeah, or at a minimum, maybe isolation is the wrong word, but lack of supervision from at least them.
Yeah, I mean, in Tulum, I was going to be isolated, so they had no one here. There was no friends, anyone. So basically, I was going to go into basically a place that they couldn't supervise or know what was going on.
Yeah.
So it's
from their perspective, they weren't wrong for saying, please don't do that.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely. Okay. So we'll make sure yep.
So it was basically an ultimatum. Do I go to another facility or do I go back to Tulum? And that was the choice. It was between those two things. And for me, I had to make a difficult choice to come back to Tulum. And unfortunately, that was very, very hard on a lot of people. It put people in a very difficult position because they were scared. But intuitively, it's what I felt like I needed to do. And so when I got back to Tulum, I am in a very, very bad position because I'm still in withdrawals. I spend about the first week in my condo just pacing back and forth. And because I'm not changing or adjusting by trying to take a walk or whatever, I'm like, I'm truly screwed at this point. Nothing's shifting. And so basically, I'm suicidal and I go through a few processes to try to get well. Number one, I bring in what's called a naturopathic doctor. And basically, we're able to get off all of the medications except for the benzos. And we're doing that through supplements, different things along those lines. And so I get off the lithium, the Prozac, the baclofen, because in my mind, and again, this is against the facility and a lot of people. And again, I would probably be saying the same thing if I were in their shoes, stay on the medication. I just knew I needed to get off to understand what my baseline was. Cause I can't split test here. There's too many.
Yeah, 100%.
And the next thing is because I'm in so much pain, because basically, as I said, benzos withdrawal worse than heroin withdrawal. So after about 2.5 months, I felt like I'm being tortured alive. Like it's basically, if people are like, well, what does benzos withdrawal feel like? Few ways I would describe it. It feels like the complete and utter absence of any type of endorphin or serotonin in your brain. It's like your brain is only releasing all negative chemicals. There's nothing like emotionally that's coming from you. Mentally, it's like if you've ever had a bad drug experience, which I have, like a bad psychedelic trip, It's basically like that where you think you're going to die. But the problem is when you wake up next day, in my position, it was still the same way in 2 months and 5 months and 7 months. So basically it felt like I was in a bad acid trip for 7 months. My brain could not comprehend this of like why I keep waking up and I'm not going back to normal. And because I'm in so much pain, I start screwing around with street drugs to try to find something. I try alcohol, it doesn't work. I try psilocybin, it doesn't work. But the one thing I take that works, to answer your question, that gave me relief was MDMA. Why? Because it's a serotonin reuptake, which is exactly what my brain needed. The problem is you can't stay on MDMA because it's an upper and you can't sleep. So basically for months, I get into a vicious cycle of taking MDMA to feel, and it's making me feel normal. I'm not getting high off of it. My brain is functioning. And then what I'll do is I'll take a Valium to go to sleep because I'm on an upper. And basically, unbeknownst to me, I'm resetting this cycle. Stay up for 3 or 4 days, then go to sleep. But I don't care because it's keeping me alive and it's giving me pain relief for a few days. And then I go back into benzos withdrawal because I'm resetting the cycle for 5 days. And again, body shaking, convulsing. I develop agoraphobia. I can't leave my house. I lose a ton of weight. Basically, my organs are shutting down. Like I am an absolute fucking wreck. And the only person that I know to reach out during that time, because people are freaking out and it's understandable, but no one knows what to do. Not even myself. I wouldn't have known what to do. Most people don't know what to do in this situation. I reached out to a girl who I had dated for a while after the divorce, and she is a medicine woman and she's a medium. And in my mind, I was like, if anyone can handle this situation, it's her. It's her. And so I reached out to her, and for 3.5 months, she dropped her life and she took care of me every single day. I was like a 5-year-old. I could not function. I just was trying. People talk day by day. I was minute by minute. I was in such bad shape that I bought a gun. I put bullets in it. I hid it in my house. And basically my mindset was, I'm going to ride this out as long as I can, get whatever life I can with this girl, and then I'm going to kill myself. And it's not because I want to die. It's just I'm biologically breaking down and being tortured. I can't handle this pain. And this goes on for 7 months. And now I am 110% convinced I am permanently disabled. Basically, I just in my mind kept looping, like, how does this happen? How, I took these pills and now it's broken my brain. And I just kept looping. I'd sit out and watch people walk by in the complex and I would just cry. Because I just wanted to be a normal person that walked by the fountain. Just a normal walk because I'm in so much pain. And then the girl that was taking care of me sat me down and she said, Chris, I have the solution. I really think what's going on is that you didn't have a mental breakdown. You're in a state of benzos withdrawal. And I work with a mentor that's taught me everything about plant medicine out of Costa Rica, and she agrees too. So here's the solution. If you microdose ayahuasca, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, half a teaspoonful, it'll cure you. And I was like, bullshit. No way. I mean, I live in Tulum. So plant medicine, all this stuff, I've been around it for years, didn't really buy into it. I was like, kept what I would call the woo-woo culture at arm's length. I'm here for Tulum, for the beach in the Caribbean, and wake up and wear flip-flops, but not really into this whole world. Don't really understand it. Didn't make sense to me. But at this point, there's no other option on the table. And after her taking care of me for as long as she's done, she's about to walk out the door. She can't handle it. And I realize when she walks out that door, I'm dead. I will literally go into the room, grab that gun, and blow my brains out because I can't survive without her. I'm completely dependent on her. I'm a child. And there's no other option on the table. So I tell her, let's do it. I didn't believe it was going to work, but I had to give it a shot for her. I really did not believe this was going to work. And so we went into my bedroom and I stopped taking the benzos. And I stopped taking the ecstasy, which was a serotonin reuptake, or the MDMA.
So you were taking the benzos post facility for how long?
For 3.5 months. I could never get off of it. It's the one thing I couldn't get off of.
Got it. And really quick, I want you to continue here because you're getting ready to tell me the story about going down to Costa Rica. Um, I specifically remember you telling me, I think it was day 2 or day 3 of when you went to the facility, and you hadn't taken anything in a couple of days, and you felt like a zombie, but then they had given you something and you went and walked a track. That's what I was referring to. You remember
Oh,
that?
yeah, that
That's what
was
I was
back.
referring to.
Yeah.
But you told me that you took something, and I guess it was a benzos, because you had been coming down off of it for a few days during the transportation and the processing and the figuring out with the family. And then you were like, I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but from what my memory, it was the lights just came on, and I went and walked a track with one of the, people at the facility or the community. But then like 6 hours later, I was right back in this hole of hell.
Yeah, so that was the Adavant, which was the benzos. So basically, actually, what happened when I took it, they gave me. So we're going back to me being in the facility, right? So if you're tracking timeline wise, so they gave me too much, and so it turned me into Dennis the Menace. So basically, I was running around the facility, slapping nurses on the ass and throwing paper wads. It's like I took 12 shots of tequila. And again, there's a lot of layers to the story. So for time's sake, I keep certain things out. I mean, we could go on for hours on the shit that went down. But basically, I believed that it was a truth serum. And they were giving this to me to make a mockery of me to the prosecution because they were videoing this. So you're right, though. When I started to come down and get to a mid-level of what the dosage should be, my brain started functioning. So that was the Adavant, because again, my neurotransmitters started firing because my brain is dependent on this Adavant to make my neurotransmitters fire because my brain is not picking up the responsibility. So basically you get stuck. So yeah, it would work. But then when I would come down off of it, my brain would not pick back up the responsibility because I needed the benzos for my brain to work. So my brain is fully now at this point dependent on these benzodiazepines.
So the reason I bring that up really quick, Chris, and I don't want to keep interrupting you here, but there was little hints along the way, but you had never connected those dots.
No, I would never connect these dots until we get out of it because there was too many variables. There was being underwater for too long. There was the benzos. There were
all the other drugs they were giving you.
You have to also remember underneath the umbrella of all this was a mental breakdown.
Right.
So even then, benzos is just a drug in the entire umbrella of mental breakdown. So it doesn't really come to surface fully.
Sure.
It was just so convoluted of an experience to understand what was going on. Too many variables. So going back to being in my bedroom, I stopped taking everything and I made her swear that she would not leave my side. And for about 6 days, I went into the most god awful experience in my life. I was withdrawing off of all of that benzos.
So you went cold turkey.
Cold turkey.
Here in your Tulum apartment or no?
No, here in Tulum, where I'm recording right now, in my bedroom.
Okay.
I'm in my office. If you're watching this online, my bedroom is next door.
Yep.
And so my body started contorting. The pain was so massive that I would either disassociate or I would pass out. I couldn't handle the pain. And on top of that, I started beating myself in the face. I never understood that behavior, but I understand it now. I was completely delusional. I didn't understand what was going on. And after about the 5th, 6th day, and basically she is just in that room with me 24/7. I can't leave this room. And after about the 5th, 6th day, I passed out and I woke up and I was lucid for 90 minutes. 90 minutes. I remember I was like, I could hold a conversation. I was lucid. And I remember thinking to myself, if it can happen for, 90 minutes, why can't it happen for 3 hours? And from day 7 to day 15, my health doubled every day. And by day 15, I was completely cured. Completely. I scanned my body. There was no depression. There was no anxiety. There was no psychosis. And at that moment, it was, I can't believe that worked. Even she was surprised that it worked at the level that it did.
So it didn't take the ayahuasca.
Yeah, what's that?
Did it take, were you taking ayahuasca? You had mentioned that.
I was microdosing. The only thing I was putting in my body was that ayahuasca.
How did that have anything to do with, and again, I'm just trying to just make sure that not only I understand, but the listeners and the audience here as well. I thought you said you were going to go cold turkey. Was it from everything and then you introduced that, or
I went cold turkey and I started doing the protocol that she recommended, which was microdosing ayahuasca, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, half a teaspoonful. So when I'm in that
this is a
bedroom,
liquid, just for those who don't know?
if you're not familiar with ayahuasca, it comes from Brazil. It's a plant medicine. It's a psychedelic. In a lot of ways, it's used for trauma work, different things along those lines. I'm not taking a heroic or ceremonial dose in this case. I am microdosing. So
Yeah.
not enough to feel the psychedelic effect.
So why do you think that has anything to do with helping cure you? And
It had everything to do with it. Why? Because a lady in Costa Rica runs a facility that helps hundreds and hundreds of people get off heroin, benzos, etc. So here's neurologically what happened. This isn't magic, right? This wasn't a miracle. It's neurological. So when I get off the benzos, my brain does not pick back up the responsibility of my neurotransmitters firing. So I can't function. I can't formulate sentences. My body is shaking. The ayahuasca I took is a very specific type of ayahuasca brew called diame ayahuasca. So each ayahuasca brew is brewed a different way by whatever indigenous tribe is doing it. So this is very specific in the way that it's cooked or brewed. So basically, it acted as a mediator between my brain and the benzos. And so it is a serotonin reuptake, the same as the MDMA, except it's the right amount that my brain needs. And it also functions as basically a mediator. So it passes the baton back to my brain so that my neurotransmitters are fine. She has done this for hundreds and hundreds, or I don't know how many people over the last 25 years. So this is just her protocol for helping people that are in the state that I'm in. So they knew exactly what to do once they understood what was going on. And basically, that's what cured me. It saved my life. And this has been done. I mean, there are different ways to get off of different prescription drugs, whether it's an SSRI or which should be an antidepressant or a benzos, etc. But in this particular case, the diame ayahuasca saved my life neurologically. And from that point on, I started researching medical journals and putting it all together. And remember, David, you were one of the first people that I talked to about this because no one knew what was going on. I remember the day you texted me, "Hey, buddy, I'm thinking about you. Can I help you with anything?" Actually, David, you can't. I think I understand what just went happen because you have to realize for all those months, no one knew what was going on. Everyone was scared to death. They were living in the unknown. And now I have the pieces to the puzzle. And so that's when I called you, David, and I said, "Brother, this is what happened." And I was just in the thick of it, right? Like I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe that I was well. Couldn't believe that this could happen from taking a prescription drug that's been going around for decades, right? It's handed out like candy.
From people in white coats that we all trust opinions from too.
And so I could not believe it. But to go back to, I think, everything that we were talking about before, everything got stripped. All of it, my businesses, my reputation, my financial status, my sanity, it was all stripped. All those cords that were tying me to my value coming from those things no longer existed. So my sense of value and inadequacy could not, or adequacy, come from my business or my roles as a CEO or running this men's group. Like it was all gone, all gone. And at that point, I had to transition. And part of my process was to learn to draw value on things that could not be taken away from me. And brother, it radically changed my life. I could no longer see or unsee what I've seen. And that was my journey because here's what happens, David. When all that stuff gets stripped away, all of it, right? The value coming from all of these things, that all of it, you're left with one thing. And that's your heart, which is the
You know
thing.
what? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And I was going to say, that's going to close with that. And that's what everyone wants in the first place.
You know what was never stripped, Chris, was your character. And I read, my wife actually sent me a really good quote yesterday. I'm going to read it here. It says, "Worry about your character, not your reputation. Your character is who you are. Your reputation is who people think you are." And I thought, man, that's really profound. I really like that. So one thing I do want to just, leave with you here today is, your character never changed. And that's why we're still friends today. You went through some shit, but you didn't change per se. It was just external environment and forces and things that were happening to you. And I always knew that and saw that for the most part. But again, awesome quote. I'm going to read it one more time. Worry about your character, not your reputation. Your character is who you are. Your reputation is who people think you are. And those are two different things, ultimately, altogether. So, Chris, what's the takeaway? By the way, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing these things. I know some of these things are hard to talk about. You had, used words earlier like having shame and guilt. And, I would imagine that there's, some of these feelings that are arising. But there's probably also the feelings of gratitude and love and fulfillment that are now coming through by being able to look back, gap in the gain, and see how far you've come. So, and then ultimately, what can we share with the audience to help them either prevent that type of thing from happening to them or break through things that they may be feeling that they can relate to from what you just described?
Yeah. So if you're listening right now and you have these behaviors in life and this underlining pain, whatever you want to call it, depression, sadness, guilt, shame, inadequacy, step number one is radical honesty. You have to remove and get yourself out of isolation, because the biggest and most, what I would see, destructive force in the nature of male entrepreneurs is isolation plus stress. It's a dangerous place to be, in your own echo chamber, by yourself, suffering by yourself. You're not meant to stay in that place. So number one, I would say, is radical honesty, getting to a place where you can come out and talk about these things. And my hope is a story like mine, at the level and as crazy as an extreme as it is, it kind of gives you the courage and hope of like, well, shit, like you can come out of that, then whatever I'm going through, I can have the courage and find the courage to do it myself. And so that's where it begins. And then step number two out of that is to get into a place to get support, to begin. We call it a journey for a reason. The journey of healing, the journey of transitioning, going from the head to the heart and healing that trauma that's in your life. And I don't care where anyone gets it done, as long as it's a healthy place to get it done. There's a lot of roads inward. But basically it's getting to a place where you begin to plug in and begin the work, the journey of healing, so that you can be the man that you feel a sense of shame and guilt for not being every day. We sit around and we're judging ourselves for failing I hear it. I'm failing as a father. I'm failing, as a husband. I'm failing at this or that. And man, it doesn't have to continue to be that way.
Love that. I love that. I agree, concur. The message is resonating. So let's talk a little bit about what people can do. What would be some of the takeaways? Let's actually talk about some of the takeaways. And then ultimately, I want to talk about the multipliers and some of the different things that you do. We started this podcast talking about how you were a real estate investor for 19 years and you haven't been one for 2 years, and you've been on this journey and you told us an amazing story. And ultimately, where does that put you now? Let's go there now. Where has that put you now?
Where has this journey put me in my life?
Yeah, exactly.
It's put me in a place of simplicity, because I'm not waking up every day needing to prove something and feeling like I'm enough for the first time in my life. It touches every aspect of your life. It touches the pace at which I live my life. It touches how much responsibility I put on my plate. It touches how I listen to my body when it says it's tired. I follow my energy. It's put me in a place of, because now I'm reconnected back to my heart. I'm reconnected back to my intuition. So rather than everything being a chess game and a game of strategy, which it was my entire life, I'm operating from a place of just intuition, from a heart level, which is so, I've never experienced that before. And I know that might sound a little ethereal, but I'm telling you, there's something powerful about operating from your heart, because your heart knows what to do a lot more times than your mind does. The mind is a crazy thing. We know, again, a prime example of what I know my brain can do, right? And if I were to sum up like the phrase like defines where I'm at, it's focus. I'm taking the word flow and I'm taking the word focus.
Interesting. Never heard this before.
So,
Go on.
flow is waking up, not everything planned out. I'll go back to what you said about Alex Hormozy. It's not appointments set up all day. It's not structured. It's waking up every day and going and operating from a place of flow wherever I need to be. My whole life was like living in anticipation of what I need to do next. Flow is actually being present.
Yeah.
And focusing, because when you're present, you're aware of opportunities and things that don't exist. When everything's planned out, you have no room for opportunity. And focus is the thing we struggle with the most as entrepreneurs. And focus for me is also simplicity. And I love Albert Einstein's quote. It's really stuck with me that I read a little while back. There are 5 levels of intellect ascending. There is smart, there is intellectual, there is brilliant, there is genius, and there is simple. Really began to understand the power of simplicity, the brilliance of it. So how is this affecting my life? It has touched every facet of my life. I am not functioning from the same, best way I can describe it is like the entire operational system I had before got pulled out and replaced with a different one. Now, the old one's not obsolete. I can go back to the hustle when I need to, but from a day-to-day standpoint, I'm not functioning out of that drive like I was. And bro, that makes every day different, man.
Absolutely, it does. Chris, what's I know there's people watching and listening to this right now, and they're like, hey, I can relate. So what's the message to them?
The message to them is that you're not defective. There's not something permanently wrong with you. You have symptoms and all of these things in your life, whether it's your marriage, etc., are simply symptoms of a root problem. And going, and again, I'm going to tread lightly depending on the situation, so I'm speaking very generally, going and just getting medicated to not have to feel the symptoms is not going to provide to a solution. It's just going to kick the can down the road.
100%.
Western thinking. And the message is that you're not defective. You don't have to live with whatever you're living with for the rest of your life. There are solutions. And those solutions might look a little bit different than what we've been raised to think in the sense of how to get well. But my message is one of hope, because I was in a situation in which I thought there was no way that I was going to get well. And fortunately, in my situation, there was an alternative modality of plant medicine that saved my life. And so I just want people to know that they're not stuck permanently. No matter what someone's told you, you're not stuck.
100%. Man, that's a powerful message. That is a powerful message. And I think a lot of people's medication isn't even pharmaceutical. It's busy.
Yeah.
It's
Whatever.
not enough. It's moving the goalpost. It's being stressed. It's overachieving. It is the mindset of constantly needing to grow and be bigger and better and stronger and faster and wealthier. And, you know, it's not always just a substance. However, what we think creates substances which make us feel. And what we feel ultimately makes us think. Back to Dr. Joe Dispenza. Love that guy. Love his work. So the message is awesome. Thank you for being here. Dude, tell us about the multipliers. I love the multipliers. That's where we ultimately met. I have personally had some of the most amazing breakthroughs being in this group, a part of this group. I don't want to toot my horn here, but I feel like I'm also somewhat responsible for some of the other members in the group's breakthroughs, at least just being there when they've experienced them, so I got to say that lightly, of course. But you mentioned brotherhood, and that's really what it is. And I want you to, take it from here and explain it. I think that there is a lot of opportunity for the listeners and the viewers to learn more about this. And this is ultimately what I'd love to talk about next.
I'm a deep believer in community, and going through everything I did, I realized that my superpower at the end of the day is creating community. People change people the most. Listen to anyone's story. The biggest times in the story, whether positive in an upward direction or, destructive in the other direction, is usually going to be around people. They have the capacity to hurt us, but they also have the capacity to heal us like nothing else can. So I'm a deep believer in brotherhood, and brotherhood I define as basically I run a community where high achieving entrepreneurs have a safe place to talk about the hard shit. To not feel like they got to walk into a room and prove something and beat their chest and get into a pissing contest. Because as I said at the beginning of this podcast, most entrepreneurs are smiling on the outside and broken on the inside. It's all bullshit. I've been to masterminds my whole life. I'm a junkie. It's not true. We all have a lot of pain. And so Simplifiers is a place to be able to come in and talk about that hard shit. But the flip side of that is also to do life together. I just got back from Puerto Rico with the boys, and we're sliding down waterfalls in Puerto Rico. You've been with us. We've flown fighter jets together, David. We've drove tanks and crushed cars. Why? Because men bond around stuff. We love this stuff. Why did we build this business if we're not taking the time to go and do these things? But while we do that, we also connect at a deep level. And I lost multipliers. It had to be shut down. And although this is a story about benzodiazepines and it's a story about plant medicine and all those type of things, my favorite part of the story is that this is a story about brotherhood, because it's a story about a leader who had some shit in his life that was undealt with. He was unable to lead at the level that he needed from a place of authenticity and transparency. And it's also about a community that learned a lot of what it means to show up and hold space for someone that's suffering, because we're not really taught to do that. And it's become a beautiful story because it's gone full circle back to the core group of this community going, we want the brotherhood back. And I can't tell you, after, again, out of everything I built, the only thing I truly cared about was this brotherhood. It was beautiful to me. It was built from my soul. It wasn't wholesaling. It was directly impacting the lives of men, helping them become better in every facet of their life. Basically, that's what we're doing. We're helping entrepreneurs create the life they want inside and out at the end of the day. And through that transition, it's no longer called multipliers. It's called simplifiers. And I think hearing that into this conversation, I think you understand why that's.
I noticed you said that, and I was like, okay, tell me more. Yeah, nice.
So I think that sums up my journey, and that sums up what a lot of people listening here right now are desiring, particularly if you've been in the game a long time, just trying to figure out how to simplify it. That doesn't mean make less money. It just means operate in a way of getting out of all this complexity and this prison of design that's basically wearing us out and burning us out. There's a better way to do it.
Dude, the complexity that we all face on a daily basis is just unfathomable, right? I mean, just some random things to think about, right? We have like 70 to 100,000 thoughts a day, right? 80 to 90% of them are negative. You can't go in the States, similar in other countries, of course, too, but you can't go anywhere without seeing tens of thousands of advertisements. Trying to listen to the radio, watch television, surf social media, you're getting bombarded with information and ads, and complexity is like the prison we live in. It's wild to think about it. It's wild to think about the complexities in nature, in our universe. but it doesn't necessarily serve us. That's what I'd like to kind of end with on my end, at least, is that the complexity doesn't serve us, man. It's wild. It's wild. Chris, if anybody that's listening, watching, so on and so forth, wants to learn more about how to connect with you, simplifiers, so on and so forth, where would we point them?
One place. I'm all off social media, all of it. I've simplified. It's unnecessary for my life. So if you go to simplifiersbrotherhood.com, you can fill out a form, and you can fill out that form for one of two reasons. If you're listening right now and what I said, just basically, if you feel like I just read your mail, because I know there's some people listening that I did, and you are really struggling and you feel isolated and you just need someone to talk to, and like, what are my options? I have a lot of resources from that standpoint, and you can go there and fill that out, because I don't ever want someone to be in the position that I was in, and that is not loved, but not, it was like the resources weren't there. So
Sure.
the support was there, but sometimes you just need practical resources. And then the second thing is, if you have an interest in this whole idea about brotherhood and doing this work and going on this journey, is like, everything I'm saying is like, those are the type of dudes I want to be around. Dudes like Chris, dudes like David. There's a group of us, and we do life deeply together. It's a tight knit group, and it's a beautiful, beautiful group of men. And so you can go to simplifiersbrotherhood.com and fill out a form for that as well, and we can connect.
Can you spell that for me?
Yep. SIMPLIFIERS, simplifiersbrotherhood.com.
Amazing. Dude, we've done some really cool stuff with the multipliers and, of course, now the simplifiers. Like you mentioned, fighter jets. We've drove tanks.
You shot a flamethrower. You remember that?
I shot a flamethrower one time. We went whitewater rafting in Costa Rica. Not Costa Rica. Was it Costa Rica? Costa Rica. Yeah, man. What else? We do. I mean, I know we've been to Omaha. We went to North Dakota.
Yeah.
The different members' homes in the group. 4 or 5 other things that I can't think of at the moment here, but
Incredible memories.
Incredible memories. Incredible memories. Remember the 1 mile zip line?
Yep.
That was crazy. That was crazy. Scuba diving in Roatan, building churches in Honduras. Can't even think of all the cool stuff that we've done. But so just, one of my favorite things isn't even the travel. That's cool. I obviously love that. Love that. That's amazing. Lots of trips down to Mexico too, in different cities down there. But it's really just having that brotherhood. That brotherhood is so amazing. It's being able to be vulnerable. And, some of the listeners right now might not even understand what I mean when I say that. And that's okay. But it's really awesome. I've never been in a group in my life. 39 years old, probably spent $500,000 on education, courses, masterminds, like you had mentioned, coaches, all these different things, trips, so on and so forth, educationally driven. And I've never had anything even close to what I've gotten out of your group, because it's really cool to get in a group, sometimes small, 5, 6 people, sometimes larger, 40 or 50. And that was with the old group, of course, where you can get around the individuals in the group and, kind of let it out and talk about your successes, of course, but also talk about the pain and the suffering and the stress, and ultimately heal. But at the same time, have the ability to reflect. So I love it. I'm so excited. I love hearing the new name. Very cool. I'm so excited to introduce this to the audience. Again, thank you for being here. I'm grateful for you, your time, this story. I know that was hard to talk about. But my goal here and my hope is that we will have some individuals that are going to be listeners or viewers here today that say, man, you guys just read my book. You guys just talked a lot about what I'm going through. And I guess to wrap this up is just know that you're not alone, number one. And number two, Chris has built a group that could probably benefit you if you're willing to explore it. So one more time, what's that website, Chris?
SimplifiersBrotherhood.com.
Amazing. Dude, thank you for being here. Freaking love you, bro.
Really I'm glad that I'm alive.
I freaking love you, man.
I'm glad I got to sit here and do this with you. So this was very special to do this with you, David. You've been with me for years as a very dear friend. You were there in Honduras, and through it all, you are one of those key people that never gave up, never quit reaching out. You're so open-minded, and that creates a sense of love that I felt uniquely from you, because that means you lack judgment in a lot of ways. And so the ability to do this with you, bro, it's full circle. So really grateful that I'm here and alive to do this with you.
Likewise, man. Likewise. Chris, thanks for being here. Guys, check it out. Simplifiersbrotherhood.com. I say that right? Is there an S on there? Simplifiersbrotherhood.com. What an awesome story. Chris, awesome guy. Thanks for being here. Guys, signing off. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in to the Discount Property Investor Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. It would mean the world to us. Seriously, please go leave us a review. I would totally do it for you. To jumpstart your real estate investing business, we invite you to Real Estate School. Real Estate School is the coolest place on the planet to learn how to get started investing in real estate. It's really cool to be a part of Real Estate School. To learn more, go to www.reiskool.com. And don't forget, you make your money when you buy, you get paid when you sell. Let's go build some wealth.